Hello everybody, it is Emery48 here, and today's video is on Star Wars The High Republic, Into the Dark, by Claudia Gray. Got this book for $11, and it takes place in 232 BBY, which is 748 years after Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil. Prologue. Jedi Master Jora Mali and her Padawan Reath Silas captured pirates stealing resources on Coruscant. After bringing them in to the authorities, Jora told Reath they were leaving Coruscant for the frontier world of Starlight. Not quite a world. I'm still a little confused on what Starlight is. But yeah, hopefully it gets answered. Chapter 1. Jora left for Starlight, which is sounding less like a planet and more like a base, a couple of weeks before Reath. This gave Reath enough time to complete his classes. Kim and other Padawans threw him a going-away party. Master Yoda was mentioned, so this is the first book where Yoda is alive and already teaching. Reath is joined by Des Ryden, former Padawan to Jora, Orla Jareni, and Master Comic Vidus. They are traveling in a transport ship piloted by Leo Gaiassi with Affie Hollow at co-pilot. They are from a shipping company from the frontier and will take the Jedi to Starlight as their transport ship had a technical error. It seems all the Jedi on this trip are somewhat hesitant in whether they actually want to be there. For those who volunteered, they are not sure yet if they made the correct decision. Des was the most confident in his choice, but he was still slightly second-guessing himself. The vessel, Leo's ship, has taken off from Coruscant and jumped to hyperspace. Leo and Affie were ready to get away from the craziness and busyness that is Coruscant. Chapter 2. During their trip, Affie asked Reath for a short summary of what a Jedi is. She still seems happy to call them monks. Affie told Leo what she learned from Reath. Reath, Des, and Comic had a brief conversation about Jedi in general and Comic's work collecting stories of different civilizations. Leo noticed some weird and unusual readings from hyperspace traffic patterns. Orla is still having an internal debate of her own. Leo went over the speakers, telling everyone to strap in. The hyperspace lanes were cluttered with debris. Something big would have needed to be destroyed to cause all this damage. Chapter 3. Leo is going to try to steer the vessel around the debris while still in hyperspace. The vessel got nicked by some debris in hyperspace. Affie went to find the damage and repair it. Des asked the Jedi who had the most training in ship repair. Reath had recently taken a course on it, so he went and helped Affie repair the damage. The debris was caused by a large passenger ship. Leo told Affie it could have been the Legacy Run, a Byne Guild ship often occupied by their leader and Affie's stepmom, Scover. Leo took them away from the debris and then out of hyperspace to assess the situation. Many ships were putting out distress signals. They could not figure out exactly what had happened. A message came through saying that something had happened to hyperspace routes and it is too dangerous to travel in hyperspace at the moment. The vessel is stranded in an empty part of space for the time being. A beacon from a nearby ship in need of help was picked up by the vessel. Orla told Leo not to answer as you never know who is out there. Part 1, 25 years earlier. I don't really understand why there's parts in the middle of the chapter. They do the flashbacks kind of odd in this book for my liking, but it kind of makes sense the farther you go through. I've not really seen it declared as a part in previous books. But it almost feels like two chapters were just kind of chucked into each other. But part 1, still in chapter 3, Master Luray sent Orla and Comic to the planets of Iram and Arona in the frontier to help with an incident that had rulers from both planets kidnapped. Isamir, the leader of a crime syndicate in the region called the Directorate, had been approached by the Hutts to destabilize the governments of Aram and Arona. Isamir had some of his people kidnap Monarch Castle of Arona and the Queen Regnant of Aram. Although Isamir's men captured the wrong queen and had captured the queen consort of Aram, Thandaka, they were being held in the tunnels of the moon between Aram and Arona. They spotted Orla and Kamak's ship enter the system. Isamir had a message sent to their ship to lure them in. Master Simics, Kamak's master, and Lorray came rushing into the cockpit when they felt the shuttle begin going towards the moon. Lorray said the message had come from Castle's ship, not Castle. As the ship descended toward the moon, it began spiraling out of control, likely shot out of the sky. Chapter 4. We are back to present time for the story. The part is not normal book part, including multiple stories or chapters per part. This part seems to just signify a change in time frames for the story. There were 11 ships in the system in total. None of them seemed to pose a threat. When Leo, under direction of Kamak, extended their scanner's range, they found a seemingly abandoned space station. They also found out that the star of this system was volatile and likely to send solar flares, putting the ships in danger. The vessel sent a message out to the other ships stranded in the system, warning them and informing them that the vessel was moving to the far side of the space station to seek cover from the star. Reith recognized the architecture of the space station to be of an ancient civilization called the Amaxine, who died off shortly after the Republic was formed. Leo was confused as to why every guild ship was programmed with coordinates to a long-abandoned edge of space. Reith suspected the Byne Guild is involved in something illegal and uses these coordinates to get away if need be. Although he thought this, he did not mention it as he was not informed enough on the topic to speak on it. Chapter 5. Leo got the vessel to safety while also towing a 2-passenger ship that had an engine failure. In that ship is Non and her guardian. The solar flare came out of the star seconds after they got behind the cover of the space station. The main central point of the space station was covered in plant life. So far the only moving things are gardening droids left over from when the station was functioning. Whatever was of the garden has seemed to expand across the entire station. Des and Reith were studying a statue with an inscription written in an ancient language. Affy had found some tools uncovered by vines and moss, so they must have been somewhat recently used. She decided to keep this from the Jedi for the moment. Kamak and Orla have gone to study the unknown language on the inscriptions. This leaves Des and Reith to organize the remaining boarding ships. The 2-passenger ship with Non has boarded. She seems very interested in Reith. Non's guardian is Haig. All the Jedi have felt something on the ship is connected with the dark side. They have yet to find that something, but are very wary of its presence. Chapter 6. Reith was explaining to Non the way of the Jedi. Leo announced that the final guests were boarding the station. Reith and Non went to join the others to greet them. Affy found the storage area of the station. There she also found writing on the walls with dates. The most recent was 6 years prior. One of the symbols was the Byne Guild crest. While Orla and Kamak were studying the statues, the Force sent them a vision, warning them of the station exploding and debris flying everywhere. As crews came into the station, they began looting the station. Reith could not control all the crews. He called for Kamak on his communicator but got no answer. Reith ignited his lightsaber. Part 2. 25 years earlier, still in Chapter 6, Master Simics had died in the crash landing onto the moon. Isamir sent 2 of his men to kill whoever had survived the landing. The Hutts had planned for the Jedi to come as a part of the mission to save the royalty. When they failed, they would reignite the people's distrust of the Republic, meaning they would be less likely to reach out again when the Hutts had their way with the planets. Master Lorray, Orla, and Kamak left their ship and entered a nearby cave entrance. In the cave there was a carving of a serpent. Shortly after, a large white serpent came up from the cave with fangs showing. Chapter 7. The crews of the ships were looting the space station. Affy hid as someone walked by. Then a scream went up. One of the crews had taken Non. The 4 Jedi regrouped back at the airlock. Orla told Des and Reith what had happened to them. Orla and Comic went back out to the upper levels. Des went to the far side, and Reith stayed by the airlocks. Reith saved Non from the people trying to abduct her. He cut off one of their arms to save her life. She then ran into the ship to find Haig. There were too many for the Jedi to fight, and the station was too large to chase them. Comic elevated himself 8 meters off the ground and spoke to everyone in the station. He has convinced them to stop fighting and meet on the airlock level. This has given them peace for the moment. Chapter 8. Des and Comic discuss the dark side in the station and have concluded that the artifacts are a beacon or a warning to stay away, but with the hyperspace routes closed, they have nowhere else to go. Reith could not get all the crews to work together. Leo convinced them by reminding them how all of them were lucky to not be caught on the wrong side of the disaster in hyperspace. Des gave Reith advice to help him move forward from cutting off a man's arm. Orla gave the man without an arm painkillers and told him to assemble the crew and leave the station. Comic took some time to meditate about the darkness on the station. Des, Reith, Affy, Non, and a representative from each ship went to explore the lower rings. They broke some of the branches. Immediately the droids tending to the plants converged and began shocking them. Chapter 9. Affy was scraped by one of the vines. Des used the Force to help boost everyone's climbing speed. Reith told Affy to shoot tree roots to get rid of the droids. When a little fire sparked, all the droids went to the fire. Once Affy got to the top, she was still in pain from the scrape and slumped to the floor. The vine had poisoned Affy. Orla studied the statues again, realizing there were chains around their wrists. These statues most likely represented civilizations or planets conquered by the statue maker, and probably the original owner of the station. Des and Reith got Affy back to the vessel and healed her with a medpack. Affy and Leo went back to the vessel so that Affy could rest. Des gave Reith some words of encouragement about his path as a Jedi. Affy told Leo about her discovery of guild signs in the higher levels of the station. He was not convinced of Affy's conspiracy against Scover. Leo thinks this is a place Scover people hide when they are delivering goods that are not legal. Orla and Comic talked of their past again. Then they were brought into another vision. Reith also got sent into a vision. He was somewhere else in the trees. Through fog, he saw a blue lightsaber come at him. Chapter 10. Reith came out of the vision after being disarmed in the vision. It ended just before the blue lightsaber made the finishing blow. The 4 Jedi discussed what they knew after the visions. The statues were not original to the station, as I had previously thought. They were brought here after, either as a warning or the holder of the darkness. The other option for where the darkness is in the lower level, which they have not found a safe way to yet. Reith predicted and was correct. If they all wore a plant safely attached to their belts, the droids would not attack them, as that would also harm the plant. They descended safely to the lower levels. The droids went down and turned off the energy field, as it was a possible danger to the plants on their belts. The group of Des, Reith, Affy, Non, and Amizi, one of the species from a ship still in the station, made it to the lower level. The group split up, and each took a hallway to explore. Affy found more writing in her hallway. One of the symbols was of the symbol Kestrel's Dive, her birth parents' ship. Scover was only her adopted mother. This symbol, she guessed, was written down about 10 years earlier. Des and Reith came to an odd door in the hallway. Des went through and the door shut. A blinding light came through the door and Reith couldn't open the door. Once Reith was able to go through, Des was not inside. Reith found an engine type not used much anymore for hyperspace travel. It was said that when they get old, as in any engine in a space station this old would be, malfunctions regularly happen by dispersing an energy surge capable of melting metal or disintegrating a human body. It seems as though Des has died, but I still have hope, as these books often has twists when things are assumed and not seen. Chapter 11. Comic felt a disturbance in the Force. Des's death has been confirmed, as the rest of the search party ran back to the airlocks. Reith told Comic what had happened. They all know that the only conclusion is that Death was vaporized and had died. Orla took charge while Comic and Reith took a moment after Des's death. Non is going to explain what happened to the other refugees. Leo is returning the plants to their original locations so the droids stop watching their movements. Orla is trying to plan the next step for the idols. After Affy took a shower, Leo asked how she was doing. She didn't tell him about the symbol she had found in the lower level before Des died. She then left Leo and cried on Geo, the Navigator rock. Reith went back down to the lower level to investigate Des's death further. He found Non already down there. They continued down the hallway together and found an airlock used to shoot transport pods out of the station. Reith now hoped that Des had been instantly vaporized by the helix rings rather than shot out of the station and into the void of space to die a slower death. Non and Reith came back up to the main level to sounds of cheering. Leo told them that the Chancellor of the Republics sent out a message saying limited travel was safe again. The hyperspace lane back to Coruscant was open. Leo said the senior Jedi has decided it is time to return to Coruscant. Part 3, 25 years earlier, still a part of Chapter 11. Comic, Orla, and Larray killed the Serpent with their lightsabers. Comic was still feeling guilty about his master's death. Larray felt the tunnels expanding farther throughout a lot of the moon and determined the hostages must be held somewhere in the tunnels. Comic reached out with the Force and did not feel any threats like the giant serpent close by. The two royalty were getting along better now as mutual hostages than their royalty have for more years than the history books can even remember. Orla, Comic, and Larray continued through the tunnels, killing 5 more giant serpents during their journey. Chapter 12. Orla told Leo that if they could control the darkness enough to transport it, they would take it on board the vessel and back to Coruscant to study it. The 3 surviving Jedi are going to attempt a binding exercise to keep the dark side within the statues while they are being transported, making them safe for the crew and passengers of the vessel. Reith, Comic, and Orla successfully completed the binding exercise and began bringing the statues back to the vessel. During the binding exercise, Affy went to scan some of the markings. She found one that looked like an explosion followed by a bivol, which is what Scover was. I find it important the book said Scover was in the past tense, almost foreshadowing that she did indeed die during the hyperspace disaster. The explosion marking could be referring to the hyperspace disaster. Affy believes the markings here were conspiring against Scover. Reith and Non said goodbye before boarding their respective ships. Chapter 13. Everyone aboard the vessel left the station and began their bumpy hyperspace journey back to Coruscant. There was a brief explanation of how Leo had immediately accepted Affy into his crew when other ships in the guild were less accepting of a young Affy. Reith wrote a report to Master Jorah about his time on the space station, although he never intended to show it to Jorah. On their way back to Coruscant, they jumped out of hyperspace to a distress signal. There was a ship mostly on fire with no signs of an evacuation. Orla told Leo to prepare to dock with the ship. Chapter 14. Comic, Orla, and Reith entered the burning passenger ship, the Journeyman, and helped those alive on board escape. Reith rescued a baby Wookiee from the Journeyman and brought it back to the vessel. Comic was in the same pod as the parents. As soon as the vessel returned to Coruscant, Comic met with members of the Jedi Council to inform them of what had happened on the space station, especially Des's death and their finding of the statues. Leo and Affy found evidence that Scover was on Coruscant as her guild code was used. Orla brought the statues under the Jedi Temple. The Jedi Temple was built on top of an old Sith shrine. This is where they are going to attempt to take the darkness out of the statues. Reith returned the Wookiee baby to its parents. He began helping those hurt. Reith then asked a droid if Jorah Mali was at the medical bay at Starlight Beacon. The droid said she was not because she had already died in a battle against Nihil prior to the hyperspace incident. Chapter 15. Reith was mourning the losses of Des and Jorah. He went and crossed the Kyber Arch by himself, which left him more confused as to Jorah's point before she died. Master Adampo of the Jedi Council has contacted Reith and wants to meet with him about information that came in from Starlight Beacon. Affy found Scover in the spaceport on Coruscant. Orla and Comic were joined by other Jedi Masters, Poret La, Tia Mirabelle, and Lurum get to Nelmo to take on the statues. Affie told Scover about the markings she saw inside the station. Scover assured her that this was not a plot against the guild, but common practice for pilots to send messages to each other, but it has not been used for some years. Affie did not seem convinced with Scover's answer. The meeting Reith attended had many Jedi in attendance. Master Adampo was giving a lecture on the Nihil, the biggest current threat on the frontier. Through the description of how the Nihil ships are created, Reith realized that Non and Hag were a part of the Nihil. Chapter 16. Scover and Affie stayed in a luxurious hotel on Coruscant. Scover left the room to have some meetings with potential clients. Affie began reading through Scover's datapad to find more information about the space station and her birth parents. Reith has given us evidence that Non and Hag were Nihil. Master Adampo and Master Rosasson were convinced but unwilling to send a team of Jedi back to the station while they were still dealing with the crisis. Affie told Leo that what she had found on the datapad. Her parents had died on the station trying to get a boost of fuel from the helix rings. Her parents were also indentured servants within the guild. The practice of using the helix rings was common for indentured servants as it would save the guild money on fuel. In return, the guild would take time off the time of servitude. The group of Jedi released the containment of the dark side on the statues, only to find no darkness at all. Comic realized these statues were containing the dark side within the station, and they inherently released the dark side by taking the statues off the station. Part 4, 25 years earlier, still a part of Chapter 16. Master Luray told Orla and Comic that they were in a tunnel system directly below the kidnappers. Chapter 17. Reith met again with the Jedi Council and was given the choice of when to start training again and the option of where his next assignment would be. Affie has convinced Leo to return to the station and take down a report that could be shown to the Republic, getting Scover and the Guild in big trouble. She would show the report to Scover first, hoping it convinces her to stop using these dangerous places. Comic and Orla are determined to return to the station and fix their mistake. Reith went to study in the archives. Comic found him there and told him they were going back to the station, without help from the Council. Reith agreed to going. The vessel, its crew, and the Jedi are ready to return to the station. Orla brought the statues to the vessel. Chapter 18. Orla accidentally stumbled upon the spice the vessel was carrying. She confronted Leo about it, but let it go as no one else would bring them back to the station. Leo also assured her that it was completely legal spice anyway, which she didn't fully believe, but just kind of accepted. The vessel arrived at the station, which now had another Nihil ship around it, much bigger than Non and Hag's ship. Leo successfully maneuvered the vessel so they were in orbit around the station, in sync with the Nihil ship, so neither could see each other. The vessel could not dock, so with exosuits on, they made the jump from the vessel to the space station during their orbit. Using the Force, the three Jedi also transferred the statues into the space station. Comic and Orla brought the statues back to a central point in the station. Affie went to the upper rings to do her research. Reith went to the lower rings to see if he could find out what Non and Hag had gotten up to while they were back on Coruscant. Reith wandered into a pod in the same hallway Deza died. He was in a pod and sent into space, and then the pod jumped to hyperspace. Chapter 19. Affie heard whatever happened to Reith and knew there was nothing she could do about it. She spotted Non in the distance. Non had changed, showing tattoos, and had multiple weapons. The shuttle brought Reith to a planet with an old Maxine base, the same ancient civilization the station had originally belonged to. He felt an evil presence on the planet. Comic realized the statues were keeping a long-lost army dormant. This army, now awake, looked almost like trees, blending in perfectly with the overgrown greenery of the station. They began to surround Orla and Comic. Reith also met the tree species, who have identified themselves as the Drengir. The pods go from the Amaxine station to the Drengir's planet, as the Amaxine tried to conquer the planet. The Drengir defeated them, but seem to not understand space travel, as some of them went to the station and were lost there. The Drengir revealed another had recently arrived the same way Reith had, and Reith knew it had to be Dez. The Drengir are not the friendliest of species, to be outnumbered against. Dez has been getting poisoned and drugged since his arrival. A Drengir gave him his lightsaber and wanted him to use it against the new meat that had arrived. The winner would be set free. Dez swung at the Drengir, slicing it in half. The vines merged together until the Drengir had regrown. Chapter 20. The Drengir bought Dez out to fight Reith. Before the Drengir began fighting Kamek and Orla, one of the Drengir said the ones who trapped them there were like them, but with red lightsabers. The ancient Sith had trapped the Drengir on the Amaxine station after the Drengir defeated the Amaxine. The ruckus of fighting between the Drengir and Orla and Kamek alerted Non and Haig. The Nihil ship stopped orbiting and sat outside the station in a fixed position. After a quick warning from Affy of the noise, Leo stopped the vessel to still be out of view from the Nihil ship. Reith defended himself long enough to plant thoughts of Master Jorah in Dez's mind. This lowered Dez's guard. Reith knocked Dez's lightsaber out of his hand and caught it. Reith turned toward the Drengir while holding both lightsabers with Dez behind him. Orla trapped the Drengir in vines. The Drengir began cutting themselves free, unleashing the 8T Garden droids on them. While the Drengir were trapped, Orla and Kamek put the seal back on the idols, putting the Drengir back into a dormant state. As Kamek and Orla approached an airlock to escape, Haig was waiting on the other side of the door with his blaster ready. Part 5, 25 years earlier, still a part of Chapter 20. Castle and Thandeka, the captured monarchs, got a hold of one of the captors' communication devices. Thandeka sent out a message with just white noise. Orla received the message and knew it had to come from where the captors were. This was something the Jedi could use to track the location of the hostages. Chapter 21. Reith got Dez into one of the transport pods. They made way to return to the station. The Drengir are boarding other pods to follow them. Haig has captured Orla and Kamek. The ship is going to send people in to kill the Jedi. They are also sending another group to investigate the activity at the transport area. Affy heard a ship connect with an airlock and assumed it was the vessel. She went to meet up with the ship. When she got to the airlock, it was the Nihil ship, and they began invading the station. Affy threw a thermal detonator at the airlock, trying to keep the Nihil out of the station. After the explosion, Orla disarmed Haig, and as he's not really mentioned after, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing she killed him too. Didn't really say whether she did or not, but he hasn't popped up in a while. So Kamek held the Nihil in the tunnel while Orla closed an emergency door, keeping the Nihil out of the room they were in. Once the door closed, they heard Affy scream and realized they had just trapped Affy on the other side of the door with the Nihil. Reith and Dez's pod arrived at the station shortly before the Drengir's pod. Dez did not have the energy to go up the hallway and stumbled to the floor. Reith is staying with Dez trapped below the main room. Chapter 22. Affy was thrown off the ledge by one of the Nihil. She landed on a group of Nihil below. As she was getting grabbed by that group, Orla and Kamek came around. As the Drengir were leaving the pod, Reith moved the pod with the force a little bit down the opening. As the Drengir walked toward the hatch door, the helix rings lit, killing the Drengir. Orla and Kamek fought off the Nihil. They retreated back into their ship, likely preparing for another assault shortly. Orla went to find where Affy had run off to. Kamek was going to the tunnels to find Reith. Kamek connected with Reith and Dez. Reith and Kamek discussed what had happened to each other since they last split. They are planning to get Dez back to the vessel. Then they will figure out their plan to deal with the Nihil. Leo docked the vessel on the station. Just before entering, there was an alert on their system, warning of another solar flare happening soon. Leo met up with Kamek, Dez, and Reith. Leo warned them of the incoming solar flare. Reith said he knew where the control room was and may be able to strengthen the shields after learning what he could from the controls on the pod. As he left the control room and passed some of the dead Nihil warriors, Non was there pointing a blaster at him. Chapter 23. Non and Reith had a brief discussion. Non told him that she would not kill him as she would lose the battle anyway, and he gets to walk away from her once because he saved her life earlier. Non let Reith get away only moments before other Nihil met up with her in the hallway. Kamek got Dez back on the vessel. Leo found Affy and convinced her to return to the ship. He said Scover would no longer be able to use the station as a place to send indentured pilots, as the Republic will either claim it for themselves or blow the whole thing up. Chapter 24. Orla caught up with Reith on their way back to the vessel. He told her about Dez. She told him her plan to let the Drengir free again to hopefully allow for the vessel's escape. They made their way back to the statues. Leo and Affy passed Orla and Reith on their way back to the vessel. Orla explained their plan, and after some questions from Affy, all parties continued on their path. Without Comic, Orla and Reith alone were not strong enough to break the barrier held in by the idols. Orla instead shot one of the statues. The Drengir chased after Orla and Reith after being set free. They led them straight to the Nihil. The Drengir and the Nihil began battling. Affy and Leo made it back to the vessel. The vines had grown even more since the Drengir were set free again. The vines now entangle the vessel so they cannot depart the station. Orla and Comic returned to the vessel. Once inside, they realized Reith had not come in with them. Reith went back to the control room, shooting out all of the pods to empty space, so no matter who won the battle between the Drengir and the Nihil, this station would be of no real use to either. Leo called Reith, telling him of their situation with the vines on the vessel. Reith finally figured out what Jorah Mali meant about the Kyber Arch. He had to save his friends, and is ready to lose his own life to save the rest of the vessel. 25 years later, Part 6, still Chapter 24. Master Liray, Orla, and Comic came into the cave. Isamir shot at Thandanka, but Castle put himself in front of the shot. Liray killed Isamir with her lightsaber. Thandanka was saddened by the death of her new acquaintance, and was honored that he had saved her life. Castle said he saved her so Thandanka could see her queen again. The Directorate was all but erased after this failure. Many of the top officials were arrested based off the information in the cave. This is exactly what the Hutts hoped for. The Directorate was the only crime syndicate in the region, so when the Hutts want to enter that region, they will do so without conflict. Chapter 25. Reith hit a vent option on the control panel, opening the station up to space. He grabbed a hold of part of the station. Everything was being sucked into space. The ladder Reith was holding on to broke, and he slid into geode. After that, the station's airlock closed again. With the Nihil and the Drengir gone, the vessel had plenty of time to cut away the dead vines, trapping them on the station. Dez's condition was unchanged. Leo applied some of the spice they had been transporting, which turned out to actually be medicinal. Dez's breathing improved slightly. Scover and Affy had a brief discussion. Scover told Affy that she will inherit the guild when she retires. Affy is determined to free the indentured servants under the guild's control when she has ownership of the guild. She is not sure, though, whether or not the indentured pilots can wait that long. Orla, Comic, and Reith met with the Jedi Council. The Council voted for no disciplinary action to be held against the three for disobeying orders, as their actions were unselfish and extremely beneficial to the Republic and the Jedi Order, especially for finding and saving Dez, who was assumed dead. Master Adampo brought the question of his next assignment back to Reith's attention. Chapter 26. Affy couldn't wait for Scover to retire before helping the indentured pilots. She compiled a report and brought it to the Republic's office that regulated shipping. Reith visited Dez after he got out of the hospital. Dez is leaving for one of the contemplation worlds to take the brash vow. This means he will fully dedicate himself to the Force and spend years at a time in deep meditation. Reith is going to have a vigil for Master Jorah and then take the assignment on Starlight Beacon. The Republic arrested Scover after receiving Affy's report. This dismantled the Byne Guild, meaning the vessel was now owned by Leo. Leo told the Republic official that a guild representative trumps a captain, meaning it is Affy's ship. Affy accepted and said the name will stay the same, as will the pilot. The vessel and its crew is now a freelance ship. Orla bought her ship and named it the Lightseeker, and is ready to begin her independent journey as a way-seeking Jedi. Reith seeked out Master Comic. Reith asked to study as an apprentice under Comic. After some interesting lines from Comic, he accepted the request. They would both head out to the frontier. A couple of weeks later, Wreath and Comic were on Starlight Beacon for its grand opening. During the ceremony, Queen Thandeka gave a speech acknowledging the events that unfolded on the moon nearby 25 years earlier. Non had escaped the station. She had a meeting with the leader of the Nihil to report on the situation, Marchion Ro, or the Eye. She told him that Haig and many others were killed by the tricks of the Jedi. She also said the Jedi and the Republic were very powerful. Ro smiled and told Non that the Nihil will be the destruction of the Jedi. Overall, I thought this was a very good book. It was one of the longer ones, I feel like, that I've read so far, but it was still an enjoyable story. I liked a lot of the characters and the character development. Only weird thing was it kept bouncing between characters a lot, so you never got like one story for more than a couple pages, which does kind of make it confusing when I do this kind of summary thing. But I did think it was a very good book, and always please let me know what you thought of it if you've read it, or if you have any questions or comments down below. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.